kind of you. All right, this meeting is being recorded. I will continue. Uh, Phil, thanks for that great introduction. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Kevin O'Neill, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober today and since January 22nd, 2004. And that's all thanks to a God who met me where I was and used what was at hand. And I am quite sure that I would not have found that God unless I first found you. And you pointed me to this relationship through the practice of these 12 steps. So I am just delighted to be here with you. I have no resentment at all. Phil said, come, and we get 400 people. And I'm looking down at my screen here. It's 124. So they must have seen the name on the flyer. Mags in Belfast on Sunday morning in Northern Ireland. I think you're going to have 500. I've been spreading the word. So that is one not to miss. It is such a privilege to be invited to do anything for Alcoholics Anonymous today. It is truly one of the highlights of my life to be able to. We're not cleaning many coffee pots or doing as much door greeting. We're starting to do that a little bit, but as we once were. But anything that keeps the lights on and keeps the hand of one alcoholic reaching out to the newcomer. I am just so overwhelmed by the privilege of being part of this amazing fellowship. My life is a love affair. I mean, it's a love affair first with alcohol, but for the last 17 plus years, it's been a love affair with Alcoholics Anonymous. And I understand there's some newcomers here. I want to welcome you to AA. If your life is not wonderful, I say welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We know what that feels like. This was the last house on the block for me. I just invite you to do what they told me to do, which is sit in a comfortable seat, identify, not compare, reach out, let people know that you're new and you're here, and follow the good orderly direction of people who are perhaps a step further down the path. It has meant all the difference for me. I'd also like to say I'm no expert on AA. I'm not an expert on Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not an expert on alcoholism. I'm not an expert on marriage, relationships, finances, life. I am simply on my best day, stumbling in the right direction, following directions that were given to me. And I try to do what my old friend who passed away a number of years ago, my old sober friend, Scott Redman, told me to do. And he said, Kevin, stop being a psychotic participant in your life and start being a loving observer of it. So that today is what I try to do. And I report progress and not perfection. But that's part of the that is part of the story here. So when I was first invited to start speaking and telling my story, a number of years ago, I asked my sponsor. I said, I don't know what to do here. I don't know what the deal is. How do I capture their interest? I hear these funny circuit speakers who just they don't use an extra word. And that's not really my deal. And he said, it's really simple, Kevin. He said, address your talk to people in their first 90 days in recovery and their last 90 days in recovery. And that's what I aim to do. Address my talk to the newcomer, the people that are here for the first time. But I also recognize that there are people that have been around these rooms for a while that may have some time under their belt that are struggling. And this is also for you. I will qualify, our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. I'm going to try to spend as little time on my qualifying piece of that as I can. I have a lot of friends in this room. I know they're going to tell me how I did on that. So I welcome that feedback. But I'm the fifth of six kids in an Irish Catholic family. I was born in the 60s. We were a family that was too poor to paint and too proud to whitewash. We were the poorest family in the richest neighborhood in town. And from the time I was ejected from the womb, I was aware of that. I knew that there were people around me that had things that I didn't have. And I was envious. I was jealous. I felt less than. And it was absolutely a defining experience for me. My dad who passed away in 99, 5 years before I got sober. Dad was one of these World War II greatest generation guys. He combat veteran in the Pacific. Those guys didn't tell a lot of stories, right? But the stories that they did tell scared the crap out of me. My father lied about his age, and he went and he joined the military and went and fought the Japanese as a young guy, and saw combat, saw scary things. We would hear some vague, references to the things that were happening. We'd sit and watch these programs, mostly on Saturday afternoons or Saturday evenings, the kind of the World War II reels, and he would kind of relate some as he would drink his beer that, yeah, he was there, he saw this, and this was kind of what he experienced. And I was kind of simultaneously in awe and abject terror, because this is these are amazing stories, and this was bravery, and this is heroism, and kind of the best example of what a young man could be, to stand up and fight for others. But the fear was equally overwhelming, because I knew that at some point in my life, maybe I was going to be expected to do that same thing. And if you knew who I was on the inside, I was a big kid on the outside. I looked like I was tough. I looked like I was strong. But inside, I was just this little scared kid. And I remember, Dad was a college literature professor. He came back from the war, and went and got his college degree and master's degree and PhD and so forth. And then he went and he taught literature. So he had this strange dichotomy of this kind of tough guy, but also intellect. And I don't know what scared me more about him, his physicality or his brains, because he was a guy not to be trifled with. And he also enjoyed a cocktail. And one of my it's the story my siblings and I laugh about now, but it scared me, and it scared most of us, I think, to death at the time, was before dinner every night, Dad would come home from the bar. Dinner would always be late, and my mother would always be resentful. We'd be expected to line up and recite something that we had learned or read or memorized, some sort of poetry or prose or whatever. And it was kind of like singing for our supper. And it was one of these just, really profound experiences for a kid. It scared me terribly to actually stand up and recite some lines from the Charge of the Light Brigade or whatever it was. And I tell this frequently. There was one selection that I picked, which was very telling for me. And it was something that I actually somewhat related to. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. It was by G.K. Chesterton, and it was from a piece of work that he did that was called. Well, actually, I don't remember what it was called, but it goes something like this. It goes, "The great gales of Ireland are men that God made mad. For all their wars are merry, and all their songs are sad." And inside me, this was kind of it was some of the building of Kevin, this young man. It had to be this tough guy, this one that stood up and answered the call. But inside, I was terrified. I knew that I wasn't going to measure up. All my life, I've had fear, just fear creeping through me. And that fear was always fear of not having enough and fear of not being enough. When I was 14 years old, my father sat me down on the bed. It was the night before my freshman year in high school. And he said, "Kevin, I'm leaving your mom tomorrow. We've been fighting." My parents fought every dinner. It was a thing. And mostly it was about money, because we didn't have any. We didn't fight because we had too much. but it was this really profound experience to sit there and have my dad say, "I'm leaving your mom tomorrow. You are the man of the house." My high school career was starting the next day, and this is how it kicked off. As I look back on that night, on that experience, my reaction tells the story. My first reaction was the reaction I thought real men would have. I said, "Dad, you're not leaving." I blocked the doorway. "I'm not going to let you go." He brushed me aside. When I realized that wasn't working, I fell to my knees. I sobbed uncontrollably. And I said, "Dad, please, please, please don't leave. I'll be good. I'll be good." Even as at this young age, 14 years old, I thought, first of all, that I had the power to stop a 50-some-year-old man from doing what he wanted to do. And then secondly, I thought that my behavior, and I wasn't a bad kid, but I thought my behavior was so bad that I was the cause of their broken marriage. I was the cause of their failure. Only later did I learn that both of these reactions are just the purest manifestation of ego. I used to think that ego was thinking, uh, you know, that I was, wonderful and terrific. And the fact is that ego is not that. Ego for me is just me thinking about me. It's just thinking about Kevin. Dad went on. Mom had a tough time. My younger brother and I were left with my mother. It was one of the most painful experiences for her that she'd ever experienced. And every night we went through that. She cried herself literally, until she passed out every night on the sofa. And I had no clue how to manage this as a 14-year-old boy. I wanted to run. I wanted to hide. But what I did was I was mean. I was insulting. I was cruel. I said, "Mom, you need to shape up. What are you doing to yourself? Just suck it up." And I just was this most insensitive guy that you could ever imagine. And it was just, it was horrible in retrospect. But what I realized is that I had so many emotions swirling around inside me and no way to process my own. I had no room for hers. I had no place to process the emotions of somebody else, particularly somebody else in so much pain, you know? And I was a loner, and I've been a loner most of my life. I, I don't want to get that close, and I don't want you to get that close, mostly because if you get close to me, you're going to see me. You're going to see how I really am. You're going to see what it's like, kind of underneath the facade that I tell you or show you. And you're not going to like me. You're going to insult me. You're going to embarrass me. So that's why the shell continued to build. And I became a liar. I was known as a liar from the time I was a very young kid. It was what I realized that the life that I was living, my family life, we had less than anybody else around us. I felt not as smart, certainly not as not as important, not as valued. I had to put something out there to the world that reflected what I thought the world would accept, and that's when the lies came. And that was a tool, that was a resource that honestly, it served me or misserved me for most of my life. My mother used to say, "Kevin, you lie when the truth will serve you better," and it's true. My 14th year, that was the year I found booze and got drunk for the first time. I wasn't a popular kid. I heard through the grapevine that there was a party in the neighborhood. I wasn't invited to the party. I wasn't the kind of kid that was invited to parties. And one of the most courageous acts that I actually undertook in my young life was to go to that party and step over the threshold into hostile territory, walk into a party that I wasn't invited to, show up, present myself, because I knew at that point in time what all of you were thinking. When I walked into that room, you could have heard a pin drop, at least in my head. And everybody in the room turned. And I knew what you were thinking. You were thinking, "That's Kevin O'Neill. He's not one of us. What's he doing here? He's a loser." I didn't hear those words. Those words weren't spoken. but that was what I was hearing inside my head. But the words I heard verbally that changed my life was some guy in the middle of the kitchen floor standing next to this keg of beer, Genesee Cream Ale. He said, "Kevin, do you want a beer?" Or no, actually, he didn't say Kevin. I don't think he knew who I was. He said, "Hey, you want a beer?" And at that point in time, I need to pretend that this was old hat to me. You know, I couldn't let anybody know that, oh, this was my first beer, this is my first experience. So I said some ridiculous response like, "Oh, yes, why, yes, what are we drinking tonight?" As if I had any sense of whether Genesee Cream Ale or Heineken or Budweiser or whatever it was made any difference whatsoever. And we poured that beer, and something happened to me that night that I learned later on only happens to alcoholics of my class. And it happened somewhere between the end of the first beer and in somewhere in the middle of that second one. And here's how I can best describe it. I was in hostile territory until I turned around with a couple of beers in me. And all of a sudden, it was as if angelic harps were playing. People were looking at me and they were smiling. There was interest, like they wanted to know me. I felt like I was in a room full of just the most wonderful love and affection. They wanted to hear my story, all of it, from start to finish, maybe multiple times. And it was just the most profound shift. I had never felt this good before. I had never felt this wanted. I had never felt like I belonged before. For the first time in my life, it felt like that inside, my inside and my outside matched up. It was as if my skin fit. What happened to me that night was the story of my drinking. I drank more than I thought I was going to drink. I got out of control. That body allergy that manifests caused me to drink and drink and drink and drink. When 3 beers was perfect, and I was in absolute heaven in the most wonderful, comfortable place I had ever been, where I could catch my breath, my body wanted more. 4, 5, 6, 7, who knows how many I had. I blacked out. I got into some form of scuffle, and I passed out on the carpet. And this was the late 70s. This is 1979, and it was this burnt orange shag rug, which was just absolutely, it was this thick, and I was face down in this. Let me tell you, not a pleasant experience to come to, with your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth, your head pounding as if like a brass band is playing. My skin hurt with these fibers of God knows what they were making them out of back then, like tickling up through my nostrils and somewhere into my cranium. I mean, it was the absolutely most painful, uncomfortable experience. I was kind of, fluids had come out of me and I don't even know what they were, but I was kind of stuck to this carpeting, and I felt I'd never felt worse in my life. But the thought that came into my mind was, God, when can you do that again? Because the sense of relief and comfort I got that night before was something I'd never felt before. And I wanted to chase that feeling because this was how life should be. Everything changed for me after that night. Listen, if you didn't have fun with drinking, I'm sorry. I had a great time for much of my drinking career. I love how we call it a career, but much of my drinking experience, I had a wonderful time, even though it was out of control. I came out of my shell. Kevin went from being that weird, awkward kid that wasn't popular to being the kid that would do anything. He'd say anything. At the party or out and about, he would be the guy that would make people laugh. And I became somewhat popular. And that was booze. That was this complete personality change that came over me, this psychic shift. So I had fun. But what I'll tell you is that all of my priorities in life changed. I was actually a pretty good student. I was actually, I kind of operated in fear. Dad was a college professor. There were expectations that we were going to go and do our homework and do well in school. That changed. Dad was out of the house. Mom was struggling and didn't have her eye really that firmly on the ball. And I had a lot of freedom. So that straight A student became an A, B, and occasional C student in high school. I played high school basketball. I have a brother who played professional basketball who's older than me. That he was my hero, my idol. This kid could do no wrong. 7 years older, I wanted to be him. I was the kid that would be out in the driveway in the middle of winter in New England, shoveled the snow off the driveway and playing basketball, just shooting around, literally doing drills and practicing until my fingers bled. Frozen solid. After I picked up that drink and life changed for me, it was as if my priorities shifted. It was like I didn't really want to do that anymore. Sure, I'll still play, I'll be on the team, but I had other priorities. People started saying things about me that they hadn't said before. They said, Kevin, you've got a lot of potential. It's kind of like a 4-letter word because I always knew that there was a but. You got a lot of potential, but you're not living up to it. You could be at the top of this class. You've got a lot of potential. What I've learned is that potential dissolves in alcohol. I would have told you at the time that I just changed my mind. I just changed my priorities. But the truth is, I had no control. Alcohol was my master. And every decision I made from there on out, there was something about booze that was connected to it. I went to college to play basketball and get an education. I went 750 miles from home. And I thought this was going to be my dream. I was going to go play in the NBA after. Well, let me tell you, the first night I was on campus, I found a fraternity. And it wasn't the fraternity that was doing the service work, walking old ladies across the street and volunteering for, the shelter. It was the fraternity that had 15 kegs on the weekend and the king Kamanawana Lea Luau. These were my people. It was the party house. It was the animal house. We lived it. We breathed it. It was the most amazing, extraordinary experience for an alcoholic in training like me. And I ran with that. And throughout the course of my 4 years of college, I decided that basketball thing's not so important anymore. So I stopped playing basketball. That showing up for class thing, especially those early ones, not so important. And what happened on Mother's Day of 1987, after 4 years at this college, 4 years of college, I was 21 credit hours short. And I sat and I watched my class graduate in caps and gowns to go out and start their lives. And I sat there with a beer in my hand with a resentment brewing. I didn't have any money, so I had to go to work. I lied. I said I have the degree. I'm just wrapping up a class. That's 7 classes. You know what they call a guy who's 21 hours short? A junior. So, but I had to go to work. So I went to work and I had this collection of jobs that, listen, I interview well. The work itself, once I show up, the story can be quite different. And I was fired from a succession of jobs. My last job working in New York on Wall Street, I ended up homeless for one day because I don't do homeless well. And it wasn't even that cold. It wasn't like January homeless, like, hanging out with a grate in the steam. It was like May homeless, where it may have gone down to 58 at night. And that was enough for a kid like me. So I did what I didn't want to do. I picked up the phone and I called mommy. This woman who I had abused, who I had neglected, who I just ceased to be a good son to, over the course of the last 8 years. I picked up the phone because she was the last house on the block for me. I had $2 in my pocket, but then I decided that God or whatever ran the universe, I didn't believe in God, but was going to have me win Powerball. And I went and spent $1 on a Powerball ticket. That's when let's just say I didn't win, but I had $1 so I could call mom, and mom sent me money to get on the Amtrak train to go home. And I went into her home. I took the guest bedroom and I continued to neglect and abuse that woman. And she would say things like, Kevin, I pray for you. I don't know what's wrong with you, but I pray for you. But I was a guy that I would have told you that this is just the way life was, because I was being run by that inner talk, the clock inside me, or that machine, that motor, because I could just not sit still. I needed to be out where the booze was pouring, and it was certainly not hanging out with mom, helping her do her chores around the house and things like that. After a while, I actually came into a little bit of money, about a year that is, and I got an apartment. And I literally remember walking out with a resentment after spending a year in this house where I'd show up at 3 o'clock in the morning with God knows who, disturbing her peace, what little peace I was allowing her to have. And I got this apartment, and that year, or that in that period, I actually met this woman who I ended up, well, we ended up seeing each other. About 6 weeks into the relationship, she presented me with some news that she was going to be late, or she was late, I should say. I thought she said she was going to be late. Two very different things: going to be late and being late. So at 6 weeks, when the truth of what actually was going on, kind of got through my thick skull, that hero in me stepped forward. That, let's be a real man. Listen, honey, this relationship is meant to be. Let's have this child and start a family, and let me take care of you. I was so incapable of taking care of myself, but this is what I said. And she said, okay. So sometimes I think the people that are in relationships with alcoholics are truly the ones who may need the 12 steps more than the ones that are actually doing the drinking themselves. But I had this woman snowed that I was going to take care of her, and for the next 7 years, children started to come, 4 of them, and I treated my wife and my family like I treated everybody in my life. I used her, I abused her, I neglected the relationship. I wouldn't come home for days at a time. And, life was absolutely miserable for everyone in the house. If we look back on pictures of that time in our lives, man, they look old. My young kids had dark circles under their eyes. My wife looked as if somebody had been physically abusing her. And thankfully, that was not our story yet. But boy, the verbal abuse and the pain that I caused that family, the electricity being shut off, the evictions, just living in fear and terror of who was going to be on the other side of the phone or the doorbell, because they always wanted something that we didn't have. In the end of 2003 was possibly one of the darkest times in my life. My mother, that mother who would have done anything for me, she said, Kevin, I just can't have you around for the holidays. I can't have you here. So I was not invited to this family Thanksgiving dinner, because the pain was too much. On Christmas Eve, I came to in the Providence, Rhode Island jail, because I had gotten into a scuffle the night before. My intent had been to go to Providence to buy Christmas gifts, because I had $300 to my name and I hadn't done any shopping. But my phone rang and it diverted me, and I ended up in a bar. And I spent all that money, some of the money of the people I was with, and I ended up in a fight on the sidewalk. And I came to that next morning in the Providence jail with no Christmas gifts bought, and a black eye, and literally my life's just spiraling around me. In January, was $750,000 in debt. The eviction was imminent. I decided to go and hit up a friend one night, the night of January 22nd. He had plenty of money. I didn't have any. I just told him that, listen, if I were properly financed, life would be good, and my ship is about to come in. So I'm actually a good investment. And he told me something that night that changed my life. He said, Kevin, I'm not going to give you any money, but call me tomorrow. And that night I drank myself sober. I literally tried to drink the pain away because he was the last house on the block. He was my last chance. And I drove home. We were sleeping in separate bedrooms at the time. Came to the next morning, all of the pain and misery and just everything in my life was just straight in front of my face as I opened my eyes. I looked in the mirror that morning, through my hangover, dead eyes were looking back at me. I had no sense of any higher power in my life. Every relationship I had was broken. Every relationship I had. And I should say that that night before, as I was driving home, as my life was spiraling, I made the decision to take that exit, not the exit for home, but the exit for the Newport Bridge. A place where 5, 10 people a year decide life is too difficult and they end it. And as I got off that exit and started to head that way, a thought came into my mind: kill yourself tomorrow. Don't kill yourself tonight. Clean up your act. Make sure that you get a couple of things squared away, because you don't want people to say bad things about you after you're dead. Make sure that little tiny life insurance policy that you have, send that check. Get that check in the mail because it's past due. Because you don't want people to say, what a loser. And truthfully, that's the thing that saved my life. That next morning, the pain of everything I had come through, the pain of the life and the misery I'd caused for everyone around me was just squarely on my shoulders. I walked onto the deck of this rental house, this place I was being evicted from, where I had 2 cars repossessed in the prior year. And I fell to my knees and I said words I had never said before. I said, oh God, please help me. I can't do this anymore. And something showed up. I can't tell you that I felt like all my problems were solved, but I felt relief, just this tiniest bit of relief. And a thought came into my mind that I hadn't thought. And I truly don't believe I thought, but was thought for me. And that was, Kevin, you got to do something about your drinking. It wasn't, Kevin, you got to do something about your marriage and your finances and your legal problems and your relationship problems and this and that. It was, Kevin, you got to do something about your drinking. I would have told you I didn't have a drinking problem. I had a drinking answer. I couldn't live my life if it weren't for the booze. That was the only thing that was getting me through. Kevin, you got to do something about your drinking. And I found my way into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I sat in the parking lot at night, and there was this cold January night, and a couple of days had passed before I walked into that first meeting, and the old ideas were starting to come back. You're going a little overboard here, Kevin. This is a pretty big step. Maybe you just need to slow down. Maybe you just need to drink beer only. And I was startled because somebody knocked on the window of this car in this dark parking lot. And this is truly where I know God meets us where we are and uses what's at hand. I rolled down the window very carefully. I thought it was the repo man. I was hiding that car. And the guy said, hey, is this the AA meeting? And I said, yeah, I think so. And a thought came into my mind that changed the trajectory of my life. And this is what was being used for me. And if you don't think it's funny, I don't think you're paying attention. The thought was, Kevin, go into the meeting. There are probably a lot of sick people in there that you can help. The remnants of my ego were what were used to get me out of the car and walk into that meeting. I walked down those steps into that church basement, and there was a guy standing there, and he was looking me right in the eye, and he said, you look new. I said, I am. And I couldn't look him in the eye, but man, he was boring into me with this smile. He had one tooth and he was smiling. And he said, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And with care and love and compassion that I had not felt, he brought me from the front door over to the coffee pot and helped me get a half a cup of coffee because my hands were shaking. And he sat me down and he said, identify, don't compare. See, I was a great comparison guy. I would size you up and I would say, I'm not going to learn anything from you. You got nothing from me. Nothing. And that night, a woman with a purple mohawk told my story. I sat there and it was like the back of my head was blown off. Everything she said, I could identify with. The details, some of the details were different, but oh boy, I heard this language of the heart that we talk about. And everyone who spoke that night told some version of my story. And you blew that lie that I've been telling myself out of the water. And that lie is you don't understand. My case is different. I'm not like you. Everyone told my story, and I felt this hope. And I started to get busy because I started hearing things about commitment, about joining a home group, about getting active with a sponsor. And I got a sponsor and I started to work these steps. Because he said to me, Kevin, I've been watching you and you are too sick to stay sober on the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. You're going to need the program too. And the program are these 12 steps, and these 12 steps are about change. And I said, I don't know what that means, but I've never felt this feeling before. I've never felt like I identified. Actually, I take that back. I did feel that feeling that first night I drank. That sense of inclusion, that sense of connectivity with the world. I felt it that night, but it was fleeting. I also felt it in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started to chase this thing. I didn't believe in God. I was too smart for that. At least I would have told you. You know, I would tell you I was an atheist, but actually what I was a half-assed agnostic, which, you know, atheism takes work. It takes rigor. You know, you really have to work on that. For me, it was more like, I don't believe in God, but whatever power is running the universe is going to fry me for all the bad things I do. So that was the nature of my spiritual condition when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is not a workable higher power for a guy like me. And my sponsor started directing me lovingly but firmly by sitting down at his coffee table, his kitchen table, with a big book in front of him and a big book in front of me. And we started to work these steps. We started to develop a relationship with I started to develop a relationship with a higher power that worked in my life. As I started to do the inventory process, I realized, oh boy, was I wrong. I would have told you the world was out to get me, that my father abandoned me, that we were just these no good people, that the neighbors were better, everybody was smarter. Nobody cared about us. Nobody cared about me. They had written me off, and it was all their fault. But then I looked at the fourth column of that fourth step. What was my mistake? And I realized what I had done. My father, dead for 5 years now, one of the most troubling relationships in my life. This is the guy that was to teach me how to become a man, what it means to be a member of society, what it means to be an honorable person. And I would have told you that I had the worst father, didn't love me, didn't care for me, paid no attention to me. And I would have been wrong. Because as I did that inventory and looked at that fourth column, I started to remember some things. My father moved away to New York when my parents split up during my high school years. And I had basketball games every Tuesday night and every Friday night. And that guy would drive 3 hours each way, and he would sit in the stands to cheer me on and watch me. And what would I do? I would wait in the locker room after the game until I knew he was gone. I didn't want anything to do with that man. I wrote him off. He sent me cards on my birthday. He called me. He reached out. I just wrote that man off. That mother of mine who neglected me, uh, you know, uh, didn't invite me to the family holidays, who I know just looked at me as if I was different and I was unworthy. Because she's the one that said, when I would tell her about the neighborhood kid who got the new pair of leather basketball sneakers or the new bicycle, she'd say, "You're not John Kenyon. You're not John Ashley." And what I thought she meant was, "You're not as good as them." But as I did those steps, I realized that that mother of mine was trying to teach me a lesson, that I was me, and that she was the one that had the warm bed and the meal on the table, regardless of how I treated her. And as I did that fifth step with my sponsor, I started to cry like a baby. And I said, "Oh, Steve, I can't make it right with my father. I can't make it right. He's dead for 5 years. How do I do this?" And he said, "You've been developing a relationship with a higher power, this higher power that's eager to forgive, that's all powerful. Don't you think this power, if that power had its way, which means had the power, he would want you to make it right if you could. It would make the road clear." And I said, "Maybe. I don't believe you, but I'll go along." And he said, "Pray for it." And I started to pray for things that I didn't believe in. I started to pray to a power that I really didn't actually believe in either. And everything changed. That wife of mine, it was more like a suicide pact than it was a marriage. It was literally one of the most dysfunctional relationships imaginable. How could I ever make it right after all the harm I had done to her, all the neglect I had brought to her? Sponsor told me the same thing. If you're supposed to make it right, that higher power will make it right. Those children, I was too busy, too unavailable available emotionally. How do I actually have a relationship with these kids when I don't know how to do that? The answer was the same, that higher power. That money I owe, $750,000, I can't pay that back. It's the same answer. Chop wood and carry water. Humility. If you owe someone money, you pick up the phone and say, "I don't have the $1,000 I owe you, but I do have $20. I will pay you $20 today, and I'll pay you $20 next week until this is done. Is that okay? Does that work for you?" Remarkable things came to pass. I was sitting in church because that's where I heard that you could find relationships or develop a relationship with a higher power. And my eyes went to the name in the church bulletin, or a word in the church bulletin, Callan. It's our eldest daughter's name. Strange word. You don't usually see it. It's okay. I'd just been praying about making it right with my father. So I read this. It said, "Cemetery guardians wanted. There's been vandalism at St. Francis Cemetery. We're looking for a volunteer to open the gates at dawn and close it at sunset. Please call Michelle Callan in the cemetery office," and the phone number. I picked up the phone and I called her. "It's where my dad's buried." She said, "That's been in there for a year and you're the first person who's called." Sometimes God hits a bank shot. So for 1 year, every morning at sunrise, and every evening at sunset, I had keys to a cemetery. I opened that gate and I walked in. And at first, I stood at the grave of my father and I started to say these formal prayers, these very stiff prayers, because I thought that's what you did. I cleaned up the stone, I planted flowers, because I thought that's what men did, were useful. But as I continued to be there and be present, I started to feel things differently. And I just started to talk to him. And I'd say, "Hey, Dad, I'm back. Boy, your grandchildren they're really growing up. You'd be proud of them. And I would tell the story of our family. And importantly, I would tell the story of my father, their grandfather, to my children, their grandfather. And something changed inside me. I started to feel this presence of this loving father, this father who wanted nothing more than for his son to be okay. And I also knew that he was okay. And at the end of that year, I went to turn that key in because realizing that my dad is not there. He's not in St. Francis Cemetery. He is right here. And he's right there looking over my shoulder right now. And Michelle Callan, sitting there at the desk, said, "No, you keep that. You keep that key as a reminder." And that key is on my keychain all these years later. My mother, that mother who I abused terribly. I was the only child, one of 6 kids, the only child that did not have a key to her home because she just couldn't trust me. I did what my sponsor said. I was patient, but I showed up, and the road was not easy. But I tried to be of service to this woman, and a relationship started to develop. I was able to find a place where we could relate, where she started to trust. Back in the fall, she was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, 87 years old, right before her 88th birthday. I said, "Mom, we're going to throw you a big party, big birthday party. You only live once." And she said, "Oh no, Kevin, don't make a big deal about me. You only die once. You get to live every day." She said, "Kevin, I have a request for you. And you're the only one that can help me do it." I said, "What's that, Mom?" "Anything you say." She said, "I want to die. I'm not going to seek treatment because the treatment for me right now is worse than not being treated. But I want to die in my own bed, surrounded by people I love. I don't want to go to a home where, because of COVID, I'll be locked away alone and die with strangers, if anyone at all. I want to be surrounded by people I love. And I want to make it to Christmas." And I said, "Mom, the first 2 are on me. The last one's on you." And on December 28th at 4:44 a.m., in my arms, my mother took her light into the next room. It was the most amazing experience I have had in my life. All of the business was done between us. There was nothing left unsaid. There was just love and joy and laughter. And she died at peace. One of my last things I said to her, and it's only because you showed me the way, was, "Mom, tell me what you pray for." She said, "Why do you want to know that?" I said, "I know you pray every night." She said, "I pray every morning too." So tell me what you pray for, because I want to pray for those things now. I want to pray for those things. And that's what I do. My wife, my amazing wife, 24 years together, 7 years of me as an active alcoholic. We built a life and a family. Those children, they didn't have a shot if something didn't change 17 years ago. Our daughter, Rory, was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I forget, and it was career day. And it's where the moms and dads come in, the doctors and the lawyers and the undertakers or whatever, and they tell the story about what they do. She wanted her dad to come in and talk to her class. And it wasn't just her class, it was like the whole class, like, 4 different groups and teachers and the principal and so forth lined up in the back wall. And this little girl, this sweet little girl who used to be afraid of me, she looked at me and she said, and then out to the room, she said, "This is my daddy, Kevin O'Neill. He's an alcoholic." And everybody in the room, well, that had their sense, gasped. That's not what you say. This is career day. And she recognized that something was wrong or amiss. And I just laughed and hugged her. And I went and told my story about what I do. And then out in the car afterwards, she said, "Daddy, what did I do wrong? When I told them that you're an alcoholic, they looked like they were angry with me or they were scared." And I said, "Oh, honey, you didn't do anything wrong at all." And she said, I said, "People just don't understand what it means to be an alcoholic. Some people think that that's always a bad thing." And she said, "But why, Daddy? Alcoholics help people from the mouths of babes." This little girl, what she knew of alcoholics was her dad sitting with newcomers at the kitchen table with a book between us, talking about a new way of life, talking about developing a relationship with a higher power. Alcoholics help people. The life that I've been able to live as a result of beating myself into a state of reasonableness, becoming desperate as only the dying can be, and coming in and finding a new way of life that you've shown me is beyond anything I could have ever made up for myself. The opportunity to be of service in any way, large or small, to be fully present, to get on my knees in the morning and just say, "God, send me. Let me help one of your kids today." And being able to get this, I am overpaid in every way. I am so grateful for the life that you've shown me. I love this life. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. Thanks for being with me tonight.